our perception that Christ really is the Lord over everything and everyone, when you have that firmly in your heart, you will be the best version of yourself, because you won't fear others, because you revere him. But I want to stress, this will make you simultaneously confident and soft. Because if he is the Lord, you can jump into every conversation. But if he is the Lord, you don't have to push. You can be gentle. You can afford to lose even. People can insult you and mock you, but you don't have to punch back, because he is the Lord.
Hi, friends. Welcome again to Develop in the Dark. We're so excited to bring to you a conversation today with Pastor John Dickson. John Dickson is an amazing author. He's a historian of early Christianity. Most of all, he's a passionate follower of Jesus who loves to share his faith. And we're going to get to hear a little bit of the behind-the-scenes story of how he came to know the Lord. And I think you're going to be really encouraged and inspired by how he came to Jesus. So all that today on Develop in the Dark. We hope that as we're in this season on evangelism, you'll like, share, subscribe, because we really want to help equip as many as people as possible with this content. We think it's going to be helpful, not only as you're developing in the dark, but as you're sharing your faith. So join us for this conversation. We can't wait today on Develop in the Dark. All right, friends, we're so glad to be on the call today with Pastor Dr. John Dickson. And Brad, this has been a very important person for both of us as we have journeyed through. I got a chance to hear Dr. John at New Spring as pastor, and got to hear him lecture also at Anderson University. You've had him as a professor in your master's program.
I have several times. So, it's been an awesome journey, and I had him when he was still living primarily in Australia, and got to hear him lecture a couple of times in Oxford and some other locations. And then also since he's moved full time to Wheaton, and really become a friend, and he's been so helpful. And he also, John, just wants you to know this, your podcast, Undeceptions, which we're going to make sure we put a lot of notes in on this, has been one of my favorite podcasts. I literally told Trevor off camera a bit ago that and I'm a consumer of podcasts, and I think what you guys have done at Undeceptions is as fine a podcast as there is in the earth. And when we grow up to our big boy maturation at Develop in the Dark, we hope to one day be in the shadows of what you guys do at Undeceptions. Bravo, man. Well done.
That's amazing.
You're too sweet.
Yeah, it's an amazing podcast, and I've enjoyed, reading Bullies and Saints, and some of your other works as well. We're just thankful for you to be on Develop in the Dark today, and really what I'd love for us to kick off with is just talking about the things that you're excited about right now. We know you've got a few projects that are just recently come through, and talk to us a little bit about this first hymn and what you've learned through that process and kind of where you're at with that now.
Well, the first hymn is a documentary project that tracks the discovery and resurrection of the oldest Christian song with ancient Greek words, obviously, and ancient Greek melody written as well. And it was found in a rubbish dump in Egypt over 100 years ago, but it dates from 1800 years ago. So it's a piece of papyrus about this big, and it's a remarkable hymn to the Trinity that dates to the 200s. And the reason that date is important is that this is long before the Council of Nicaea, where they nutted out the details of the Trinity, long before Emperor Constantine. And it's also a period of great persecution. Christians were suffering arrest and worse in this very period in which the hymn was written. And yet it's so confident and joyful. It praises the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and then declares God to be the only giver of all good gifts. And what I find to be mm, powerful to me as I've worked on this project is that there's a temptation for Christians when they feel pressured from the world to punch back. But here are these Christians who are just praising back. You know what I mean? Like they were suffering way worse than we have ever suffered. And yet their thought was just to lift their praises and confidence and joy to God. So the documentary is about the history, but it's also about the recovery of the song. And Chris Tomlin, Ben Fielding are part of the film, and they resurrect this ancient song and give it back to the church, give it back to the world. So it's been very exciting. And I've been zipping around Australia these last couple of weeks, showing it in cinemas and doing Q&A with audiences. So you asked me what I'm excited about at the moment. It's pretty focused on the first hymn.
How in the cinemas that you're showing it in, what kinds of questions are you getting there? What's the general flavor? Right. Or is it a lot of skeptical people? Are there believers watching this? What's the kind of the feel of that?
It's both. We've made the film. I mean, everything I do is for believer and the doubter. I don't do anything that isn't for the doubter as well. And so, yeah, we've definitely had doubting questions. You know, some people say, "Oh, how do you know the date?" It's actually quite easy to work out the date of a papyrus. So that's cool. You know, tell us more about Roman persecution. Why would the Romans have done this? Some people are puzzled just at the musical level, because we were all taught at school that musical notation was invented in the 1000s by an Italian monk. And that's true. Our musical notation was, but the Greeks had a different system of musical notation, which predates that by 1500 years. Wow. So the clever Greeks often come up. People ask about other gods. You know, what were the other gods at the time, and what does this hymn say about those gods? And it's just a full range of different questions, and so it's been fun. You never know what's coming. I've just been doing night after night after night in different cities around Australia, and every night's different because it's humans, and they're all different.
It's amazing. You know, each time that I've heard you speak, it's an amazing thing to hear you connect, whether it be Psalms or a lecture, you know, on the ancient church or whatever. You're always connecting it to this evangelical mandate. It feels like there's a passion in you to share the gospel. There's a passion that it really forms a primary subtext of anything that you're communicating. And I'm just curious where that comes from. Where did this begin for you? And it may be helpful to our folks for you to kind of zoom all the way back, maybe to some testimony there. I know that when you came to New Spring Church, and we got a chance to hear just a snippet of your testimony there, I was really moved by the story of your teacher and her role in your life. So I wonder if you might just kind of take us back and work us through your testimony a bit, and then come to this moment of now you have a ministry where you're sharing the gospel, where you're providing these opportunities for people to interact, and kind of how's the motivation and how did you get there? So kind of take us on that journey.
So I'm 15 years old. I'm at high school here in Sydney, and I come from a typical Aussie home, by which I mean zero Christianity, zero religion. We never said grace before meals. I was never sent to, you know, kids' Sunday school, or never went to church. And that's very typical here. But we had a teacher at my school, the local high school, state school, who was a really open Christian and would talk about her faith lots, and did something that would now be illegal. Probably was illegal back then too, but she got away with it somehow. She invited the class to her home on Friday afternoons after school for hamburgers and milkshakes and what we call scones. And they're not what you call scones. So I don't know how to describe them, but they're British sweet scones that you put cream and jam on. Have you got a word for that?
A donut would be the
I
closest
know.
thing I've got, but yeah,
Maybe
it's probably
a sweet biscuit or something.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we went to her home, and we would eat her food, and then she would bring out the Bible and ask if we had questions. She got to the point where, I mean, we went back Friday afternoon after Friday afternoon because her food was fantastic, and she was smart and funny and had answers to all our questions, and the food was great, and we were a pack of young lads, so we felt safe. But she read us the Gospels. That's what she did. Her plan was to introduce us to the person of Jesus. She knew that we knew nothing about the Christian faith, so she thought Jesus is the best thing Christianity has going for it. So just introduce them to Jesus, and then she'd just take our questions. So this is the environment where I and about 5 of my mates became Christians, hearing the Gospels read and having questions answered. And I think so. Maybe after a year and a half, I found myself, actually fully believing in Jesus, and as teacher, as healer, as the Savior who died, as the risen Lord. And I just thought instantly, I want people to know these amazing things. So it was kind of a natural outflow. For me, it was a bit like if you have a favorite rock and roll band. For me, it was U2 at the time, or a favorite football team, by which I mean the round ball football, which for me was Manchester United. You can't help but talk about it from time to time, depending on your personality, obviously. But for me, communicating Jesus to others was just like communicating how awesome the rock band U2 was. So there was this sort of natural thing about it. But everything I've done from those days to today has been about making Christ public. So the first way I did it was as a musician. So the guys that all became Christians at high school started a band. We just started playing in pubs and clubs during high school, the last year of high school. And that took off. That was my full-time job for 6 years. But we were motivated not by being rock stars, although I'm sure there was a bit of arrogance, teenage arrogance there. But we wanted to go to places where we could talk about our faith between songs. And after that, we all moved, the band actually disbanded, and we moved into theological studies. Not because I wanted to be an academic, but because I thought we needed to deepen our faith. And we need to be able to answer people's questions. I moved from there into doing a PhD in ancient history in a state university. But for me, it was never that I wanted to be an academic. It was because I wanted the credibility to make Christ public. I started writing books, not because I was a literati, but because I wanted to make Christ public. I started the Center for Public Christianity in Sydney with a bunch of scholar communicators, not because I wanted to run a center, but because I wanted to make Christ public. So, I mean, you're picking up a theme here. I was also then a pastor for 10 years of a local church. And I don't see myself as super suited to be a pastor. I'm not like Brad, this, wonderful, gorgeous, humble, other person centered, relational character.
And you're so
but I was convinced that a local church is actually the most powerful thing to make Christ public in a community. Yes. Way better than any movie I can make, any book I could write. A local church functioning how it should can make the biggest splash for the Lord in a city. And then I ended up going to Wheaton College as a professor there, not because I think of myself as a career professor, but because, I felt like the Lord calling me and my wife to come and do in America what we've been doing in Australia, to make Christ public and help Christians do the same in increasingly skeptical times.
Yeah, beautiful.
Amazing.
Well, just to come in, and I've shared this. I don't know what it is about the specifically the Aussie secular world, but there is something so on time with the way you and many of my friends that are Australian, we have many here at New Spring that are on staff that you've met a couple, the way that you engage, and even down to it's not apologetics, it's public Christianity. There's a disarming to that. There's a realness to that. There's a utilitarian value there. And I think your theme, Dr. John, you're going to get to heaven and you're going to see you leaning into that theme for your whole life is massive, big, and important. And just as someone who's downstream from you and in the wake that I've enjoyed, I think it is so obvious and helpful, and you're doing a great job of it, man. And it just, I know our listeners have leaned in, our people at New Spring have leaned in, and just, we have nothing to fear in studying history when it comes to the way it lifts up the reality of Jesus. Again, I'm just reminded, my first interaction with you was really leaning into Bullies and Saints, which was right on time, which is another fantastic work that you've put in just in terms of the history of the church, what it's done, owning some of the warts of Christians with quote fingers historically, but also let's also own and be honest about some of the beautiful testimonies of the church for the last 2,000 years. And I just think you've done a great job. And so, man, I'm grateful to have you here to talk about this. And, we're right now in this season seeing things happen. My brothers around the United States are seeing people come to church in kind of new, mean, statistical increases, but it's something I actually heard from you probably about 3.5 years ago, articulating in Britain based on just some Anglican info that you had access to. We're now calling this the quiet revival, is what we actually have deemed the phrase. But I heard you articulating this 3.5, 4 years ago, right on the back of COVID, what people were beginning to see. So I wonder if you might speak to this cultural moment and just kind of put some of the language in and some of the things that we're seeing across the board, if that's all right, Trev, just to jump into that.
Love it.
Yeah. So I think two things are happening at the same time, and it's important to understand them both and look at them both. So I do think skepticism and antagonism toward the church and Christianity and Christian morality is increasing. Right. So you've got one track. But at the same time, you've got this weird response where people are turning to Christianity. Church attendance numbers have dipped up in Britain slightly. They've plateaued here in Australia. It was sort of going down like this, and now it's sort of plateaued. So there's interesting positive things. The reason I'm not super keen on the quiet revival language is that it gives the sense that it's now turned, like the whole culture has turned and it's now quietly just growing. Whereas I think it's important to say it's quietly getting harder and it's growing. Like it's two things at the same time. And we're going to see these two tracks in society. We're going to see a track that's even more committed to the ending of Christianity, but we're going to see more Christians. And in a way, that's nothing to fear. Like that's, at least when the dividing lines are clear, it actually brings clarity to people. Because one of the things that can kill Christianity is nominal Christianity, mere cultural Christians who, speak one thing with their lips, but it doesn't actually affect their lives. I don't think that helps anyone. So what we want is there to be clear dividing lines between, the world and the church. Not that the church isn't totally embracing of the world in its love and its friendship and so on, but that it's clear who is and isn't a Christian, rather than there being this amorphous thing where you can't tell. But the basic point is, yes, we've seen conversions at a slightly higher rate in Britain. I've heard of it happening in America, but I want to see a little more data before I agree that it's really happening in America. Because honestly, I think there's a lot more pruning to go on in America before we really can see a turnaround. Because America has a lot more nominal evangelicalism than anywhere else in the world. So you have a whole cohort, millions of people who say they're evangelicals, right? Who would even say, oh yeah, of course Jesus is coming back one day. Like they've got all the things. But do they go to church? Nope. Do they pray? Nope. Do they read the Bible? Nope.
Wow.
Right. Now that's a phenomenon that really only exists in America. If you're evangelical in Britain or in Australia or in Asia, if you say that you're evangelical, that means you're actually one of those Bible reading, praying, going to church type Christians. So it's a really interesting thing. There may be more pain, is what I'm saying, in the American church before we can really see the effects of people actually coming to genuine faith in any big numbers.
I wonder if some of the data that we're seeing here from Barna and these other folks, if it's really indicative of a new level of openness to spirituality rather than specific to Christianity, right? So
it seems to be both. It seems to be both in the data. Yeah, and I think what part of why I'm not stressed about things getting worse as well as getting better is that it's a bit like the prodigal son. Sometimes people have to get to the end. Sometimes the culture needs to get to the end, needs to get into the pig pen, eating the pig food in order to realize what have we lost back at the Father's home.
Wow.
And I think our culture is heading toward the pig pen. It's not completely there, but we probably need to see a lot more of the pig pen, where people will realize, what have we turned our back on? When it comes to sex, things have just become so crazy in our culture, but it maybe needs to become crazier for people to think, hang on, what did we lose by walking away from that traditional stuff? Meaning, as the sense of purpose and fulfillment has evaporated from our culture. Like the studies on the loss of meaning amongst Americans and Australians is scary. But maybe that needs to get a little bit worse for people to think, why did we turn our back on that meaning about God and Christ and all of that? Friendships, the circle of friendships that people have in America and here, but especially in America, has reduced in the last 20 years. So I don't have the numbers on my fingertips, but it's something like, because we did a whole episode of Undeceptions on this, it's something like 50 years ago, people could count 20 friends, people they would say were their friends that they could rely on. 20 years ago, that had reduced to something like 15. Now it's about 5.
Wow.
Right? Now, that's a dramatic change in culture. We have lost community. But maybe it needs to get worse for people to think, hang on, isn't there that one community where like they're all friends? There are high people and low people and people in between and different races, and they're friends. So I could go on, but I think we need to prepare ourselves for things getting scarier and uglier and messier, as well as people realizing they need to come back to the Father's home.
Wow, that is prophetic. I've not
is.
heard anybody speak, with the prodigal over the top of culture, but I tend to see that immediate in my spirit say that's incredible.
It does make sense too, because you're seeing edges of that.
Sure.
In the media and other places, you're seeing people who, may have kind of released some of these, Judeo-Christian things, kind of returning to that. But
That's
it's just
right.
an edge.
Right. So
There's
we
just
talk
an
about the
edge of it.
cannibalism of postmodernity, and it's eating itself up. And, then you talk about, like you're saying, guys like Tom Holland, who would not say I'm a born again believer, but would say I'm a language here, a cultural Christian. I'm a Christian in namesake.
Yep.
Values of Christianity are meaningful. We've lost those. And so they're making waves in academic spaces. The conversations that, you see on Joe Rogan, we've had this conversation with guys like Wesley Huff. There's something about that, the beautiful world that was, I guess Rousseau was probably most famously known for kind of leading down that life. And it's not getting to a place where it's actually delivering on the kingdom that they were, trying to get us to. So yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I'm curious to know, in this conversation, as we're talking about trends and cultural moments, where does that leave just the average churchgoer? So you're a churchgoer, and I'm really trying to connect this back to this beautiful teacher that you had. She may have been wired into, what was happening in her world, and she may not have been. I don't know. You'll have to tell us that, but I'm just thinking about a person who may not be cued into all these cultural shifts and moments, but they're just kind of going through their life. It's almost like a kind of obscurity for a person who is just trying to get along. What kind of encouragement do you give there? I'm thinking of your professor. Did she have some kind of overarching strategy, or was she just
being faithful?
Was she just enamored with Jesus?
Yeah.
So how would you respond to that?
She was two things at once, and this has stuck with me through my entire ministry, and it's the two things I always urge Christians to adopt. And there are different ways of describing it, but basically, she was solid and soft. She was full of conviction and compassion. And it's those two things at the same time. Wow. So she wasn't like one of these Christians who just, was all accepting and, never criticized. Like, she was quite solid in her convictions, theological convictions, moral convictions, and so on. Mm-hmm. But when faced with us, who were quite immoral and pagan, she was incredibly soft and generous and compassionate. So she made absolutely clear what she believed and what she thought of our lives, but that didn't affect her ability to love us at all.
Wow.
This is the key. It's Christians need to be solid and soft at the same time. They need to be full of conviction and compassion at the same time, so that they can go out into the world, and their friends will say, "Oh, what do you think?" And you say, "Yeah, this is what I think, because I just think Jesus is true." And there's just an openness and a solidness and a conviction about it. But you never allow that to transform into judgmentalism, looking down your nose at someone, not hanging out with someone. So I'm of the view that Christians should be able to be right out there in the world, with the immoral and the godless, but maintain their conviction about Jesus. Because we all know the caricature of the Christian who goes one way or the other, right? There's the Christian who's full of conviction, but is a jerk. Okay, that's not very Jesus-like. But then there's the Christian who's full of compassion, but no conviction, right? They're just giving up their beliefs and whatever, right? That's not Jesus' way either. Jesus was able to thunder in public about the judgment of God coming on the sinners, and then invite himself to a meal with the chief sinner of the town. What's going on there? It's conviction and compassion. It's solid and soft. And I have this when we were at the Center for Public Christianity, which I started way back in 2010 here in Australia, and it's still going great guns, though I haven't worked there for quite a few years. We had this word picture for what we wanted to be in secular society, and our idea was, those high jump mats, those huge high jump mats, or a pole vault mat. You do the pole vault over and you land in this giant mats. Now, have you ever tried to move one? They're like, you need 6 people to lift it. They're so immovable. But if you fall into one, it is so soft. And we said, that's what we want to be in society. When people bump into us, we want them to realize we are immovable in our beliefs and convictions. But when they bump into us, it's soft and welcoming and generous.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
When you're talking about this, and you're talking about your teacher, just to say again, when I describe you to other people, because again, in evangelical, and at least the streams I've come up in, Doc, you are a complete unknown to me. All right. I've told you this. Maybe it's because we just don't have Anglican influence, or maybe it's just because, and so I cannot believe how much insight and help you've given. And so when I'm describing you to other pastors, like, you've got to lean in because of what you just described. You're deeply convictional and deeply compassionate. And I have braced in ministry, because when I find my heart lean into a stream that's like that, I'm always like, oh man, I sure hope that they don't, nuance away the truth here. And I have found again and again and again, in spaces of close-handed orthodoxy, you and the things that you have led have been exactly what you just described. I didn't know you had that image, but again, I'll just commend, if you want to go pick up one episode, go lean into, Undeceptions episode on hell. I thought it was beautiful. I found myself in tears listening to the compassion, but yet the conviction. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to be full of grace and truth, how we are public Christians. I wonder, that when you're describing this, I have the image in mind of the Jerusalem Council, of how the church engages and puts their arm around the whole Roman pagan world, but yet they are immovable about some things. And those things are these convictions around worship and these convictions around sexuality. And just your thoughts as we are navigating culture, and we're putting our arms around as best we can and inviting, come to Jesus. But our worship and our sexual ethic, how key that is. I just, some thoughts there. That has been something I've been resonant with here in the last couple of years as we are trying to navigate putting our arms around the world.
Yeah. And often Christians feel it's not possible to maintain our views on sex, for example, without being a jerk, because we've seen examples of people not being nice, of people who hold these views but are real jerks about it, right? And so what that causes Christians to do is to say, well, I don't want to be one of those people. I don't want to be one of those judgmental people. So they move their view, right? And because the sweet people are the ones who are all accepting and affirming. Okay, so obviously, sociologically, I want to be more like that sweet person than the hard jerk. But we completely forget that there's another way. There's a way of being absolutely immovable on the issues of sex, but it not affect how you treat someone who holds a different view, so that you can go to dinner with a gay couple. Why not? Absolutely, why not? And if it comes up, what do you think of our relationship? You say, well, look, I'm a traditional Christian, and I think God only blesses sex in the context of a heterosexual marriage. But I just love being with you guys. I love you guys. You're great fun. Why not that? Be firm in conviction, but incredibly flexible in embracing friendship. Okay, that's the model we need. Yeah, you're right. The Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 is a good example of that. So is Paul's statement about his own mission in 1 Corinthians 9, where he says, to the Jew, I become like a Jew. To those not having the law, I become like one not having the law, though I am still under Christ's law, he says, right? Wow. Now, that is key, because he's saying, I can flex with those without the law, Gentiles, but I'm never without the law of Christ. Right? So I will not compromise. It isn't that I become so flexible I start doing immoral things. I become flexible in everything, except I won't change my view of Christ's law. That Christ's law governs how I live. And that's what Christians need to do. And it's not rocket science. And so I almost feel like you don't need an apologetics program. You don't need tricky answers to questions or, a memorized gospel presentation. You just need to remind yourself every day, Jesus is Lord, his way is the truth, I'm under the law of Christ, and then go out into the world embracing everyone you meet. That's all you need. And you'll find that just in the way you're living and speaking, you're conveying the gospel. Because what is the gospel? The gospel says God profoundly disagrees with you and loves you at the same time.
Perfect.
Right? So if you're like that, if you're someone who can disagree with someone on sex or, the obsession on beauty and celebrity and all the money or whatever, but I love you and it doesn't affect my ability to be with you, that you're very close to the gospel.
Embodiment.
Right? Because you imagine you're at a dinner party with a gay couple, with your gay next door neighbors, right? And it comes up that you hold a traditional view, that you don't actually think they're married, for example, right? But the gay couple's going to think, well, what are you doing here? Oh, why would it affect, the way I treat you as a human being? I know God loves you, right? Simultaneously, you've got very close to the gospel of sin really mattering, but God wanting to embrace the sinner.
Beautiful. Incarnational ministry.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. I think, as we think about the church, you mentioned this earlier on, the power of the church, the power of the church in sharing the gospel. I think that folks have difficulty, especially in our culture, in the American culture, of understanding that they are the church. And seems to be a divide between the entity or the institution of the church and the idea that I have a responsibility as a member of the body of Christ. And I wonder what's your suggestion on what we should do about that? How do we get that into our folks? What do people who are listening, how do we get that idea that you are the body of Christ into their, motivation?
I think we just need to elevate normal stories, normal Christian stories. And that can be through spots in video in the service. It can be, the stories that Brad tells might not be glory stories of his own. I mean, I know he's not the kind of preacher that tells glory stories of his own, but to elevate simple Christians you've heard about. Like, so you just drip, that it's about the Christian you've never heard of. They're having an impact, right? So it's elevating those stories that I think helps people think, oh, I could do that. Well, whatever someone's sitting in church listening to Brad Cooper, they're going, I could never be that. I could never do that. I could never say that, right? Yeah. And it's true, they probably couldn't. But if they have lots of pictures of ordinary Christians changing their little world around them, they can believe that they have a role to play. Because Christians, genuine Christians, want to play a role, right? But sometimes it's just their imagination is clouded. Their horizon is very, very small. You need to lift that horizon for them.
Right. And that gets us right back to your teacher, the obscure, had you not mentioned her in a sermon, we would have never met her. We wouldn't know her. And she would not only to God in terms of our understanding, but now
which
we
from
know.
the heart of our ministry, this podcast is called Develop in the Dark.
Right.
And so she resonates. And,
Exactly.
I know you've shown me pictures of you guys going back and being, I guess, a part of her retirement. And one day I hope you'll introduce us, on this side of glory or the next, because I think that is what the church is. So we call it ministry camouflage.
That's it.
Just everyday men and women being faithful in their space, stewarding the influence they have. And she's an inspiration, I know, to you, but she's an inspiration to us here at Develop in the Dark.
That's amazing. Dr. Dickson, our time is about up, and we want to value your time. I wonder if you might just have one word of encouragement to the folks who are listening. They are developing in the dark. We're taking them through a series of podcasts and trying to inspire and encourage them to share their faith. And I wonder if we just end up today with you giving these folks a word of encouragement about sharing their faith.
Yeah, I mean, don't fret about, being the evangelist. Don't put pressure on yourself that the New Testament doesn't put on you. Just be the best version of yourself. That's it. That's all the Lord asks. And the way you become the best version of yourself is just to remind yourself who is the Lord in every single situation you find yourself in. You might be a student going to university and your professors are scary atheists. Remind yourself Jesus owns that room too, right? You might be going to Thanksgiving lunch and your skeptical uncle is always bad-mouthing the church. Remind yourself Jesus owns that room too.
Wow.
Like our perception that Christ really is the Lord over everything and everyone, when you have that firmly in your heart, you will be the best version of yourself because you won't fear others because you revere him. But I want to stress, this will make you simultaneously confident and soft. Because if he is the Lord, you can jump into every conversation. But if he is the Lord, you don't have to push. You can be gentle. You can afford to lose even. People can insult you and mock you, but you don't have to punch back because he is the Lord. The fact that he is the Lord means you can just approach the world with gentleness and respect.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Wow.
That's a great encouragement.
Yeah, and that's a great place to end our conversation. Dr. Dickson, we're just so thankful for your ministry. We're thankful for your investment of time on Developing the Dark, and we hope you'll be back many more times, and you'll be producing many more podcasts for us to enjoy. We're just very thankful that you've invested this time with us today.
A pleasure to chat. God bless you guys.
Thanks, brother.